Proportional representation characterizes electoral systems by which divisions in an electorate are reflected proportionately in the elected body. If 30% of the electorate support a particular political party, then roughly 30% of seats will be won by that party. The essence of such systems is that all votes contribute to the result, not just a plurality, or a bare majority, of them. Proportional representation requires the use of multiple-member voting districts. It is not possible using single-member districts alone. There are two PR voting systems, party list PR and the single transferable vote. Mixed-member proportional representation, also known as the additional member system, is a hybrid mixed electoral system that uses party list PR as its proportional component. MMP has the potential to be proportional or semi-proportional depending on a number of factors such as the ratio of FPTP seats to PR seats, the existence and non-existence of compensatory seats to make up for overhang seats, and election thresholds. With party list PR, political parties define candidate lists and voters vote for a list. The relative vote for each list determines how many candidates from each list are actually elected. Lists can be closed or open. Open lists allow voters to indicate individual candidate preferences and vote for independent candidates. Voting districts can be small or as large as a province or an entire nation. The single transferable vote uses small districts with voters ranking individual candidates in order of preference. During the count, as candidates are elected or eliminated, surplus or discarded votes that would otherwise be wasted are transferred to other candidates according to the preferences. SDV enables voters to vote across party lines and to elect independent candidates. Mixed-member proportional representation, also called the additional member system, is a hybrid, two-tier, mixed-member system combining a non-proportional plurality, majoritarian election and a compensatory regional and national party list PR1. Voters have two votes, one for the single-member district and one for the party list. The party list vote determining the balance of the parties in the elected body, by proportional apportionment, first used in Zurich in 2006, is a two-tier method for adjusting an election's result to achieve overall proportionality. Some form of proportional representation is used for national lower house elections in 94 countries, party list PR being the most widely used. MMP is used in 7 lower houses, and SDV, despite long being advocated by political scientists, is used in only 2. Ireland since independence in 1922, and Malta since 1921. In the United States, party bosses were generally opposed to it because it transferred more power to the electorate when selecting independent candidates to put forward. As with all electoral systems, there are overlapping and contentious claims in terms of its advantages and disadvantages. Advantages and disadvantages. The case for proportional representation was made by John Stuart Mill in his 1861 essay Considerations on Representative Government. In a representative body actually deliberating, the minority must of course be overruled, and in an equal democracy, the majority of the people, through the representatives, will outvote and prevail over the minority and the representatives. But does it follow that the minority should have no representatives at all? Is it necessarily that the minority should not even be heard? Nothing but habit and old association can reconcile any reasonable being to the needless injustice. In a really equal democracy, every or any section would be represented, not disproportionately, but proportionately. A majority of the electors would always have a majority of the representatives, but a minority of the electors would always have a minority of the representatives. Man for man, they would be as fully represented as the majority. Unless they are, there is not equal government. there is a part whose fair and equal share of influence in the representation is withheld from them, contrary to all just government, but, above all, contrary to the principle of democracy, which professes equality as its very root and foundation. Many academic political theorists agree with Mill that in a representative democracy the representatives should represent all segments of society. Fairness. PR tries to resolve the unfairness of plurality, majoritarian systems, where the largest parties receive an unfair seat bonus, and smaller parties are disadvantaged and have difficulty winning any representation at all. The established parties in UK elections can win formal control of the parliament with as little as 35% of votes. In Canada, majority governments are regularly formed by parties with the support of under 40% of votes cast, coupled with turnout levels in the electorate of less than 60%. This can lead to a party forming a majority government by convincing as few as 1/4 of the electorate to vote for it. In the 2005 general election, for example, the Labour Party under Tony Blair won a comfortable parliamentary majority with the votes of only 21.6% of the total electorate. But PR systems with a high electoral threshold, or other features that reduce proportionality, are not necessarily much fairer. In the Turkish general election 2002, using an open list system with a 10% threshold, 46% of votes were wasted. Plurality. Majoritarian systems can also disproportionately benefit regional parties that can win districts where they have a strong following, while other parties with national support but no strongholds, like the Greens, win few or no seats. An example is the bloc QUE acute BE acute COIs in Canada that won 52 seats in the 1993 federal election, all in Quebec, on 18% of the national vote, while the Progressive Conservatives collapsed to 2 seats on 16% spread nationally. Similarly, in the 2015 UK general election, the Scottish National Party gained 56 seats, all in Scotland, with a 4.7% share of the vote, while the UK Independence Party, with 12.6% of the national vote, gained only a single seat. Election of minor parties. The use of multiple member districts enables a greater variety of candidates to be elected. The more representatives per district and the lower the minimum threshold of votes required for election, the more minor parties can gain representation. In emerging democracies, inclusion of minorities in the legislature can be essential for social stability and to consolidate the democratic process. Critics, on the other hand, claim this can give extreme parties a foothold in parliament, sometimes cited as a cause for the collapse of the Weimar government. With very low thresholds, very small parties can act as kingmakers, holding larger parties to ransom during coalition discussions. The example of Israel is often quoted, but these problems can be limited, as in the modern German Bundestag, by the introduction of higher threshold limits for a party to gain parliamentary representation. Another criticism is that the dominant parties in plurality systems, often looked on as coalitions or as broad churches, can fragment under PR as the election of candidates from smaller groups becomes possible. Israel, again, and Brazil and Italy are examples. However, research shows, in general, there is only a marginal increase in the number of parties in parliament. Open list systems and SDV, the only PR system which does not require political parties, enable independent candidates to be elected. In Ireland, on average, about 6 independent candidates have been elected each parliament. Coalitions. The The election of smaller parties gives rise to the principal objection to PR systems that they almost always result in coalition governments. Supporters of PR see coalitions as an advantage, forcing compromise between parties to form a coalition at the center of the political spectrum, and so leading to continuity and stability. Opponents counter that with many policies compromise is not possible. Neither can many policies be easily positioned on the left-right spectrum, so policies are horse-traded during coalition formation, with the consequence that voters have no way of knowing which policies will be pursued by the government they elect. Voters have less influence on governments. Also, coalitions do not necessarily form at the center, and small parties can have excessive influence, supplying a coalition with a majority only on condition that a policy or policies favored by few voters is adopted. Most importantly, the ability of voters to vote a party in disfavor out of power is curtailed. All these disadvantages, the PR opponents contend, are avoided by two-party plurality systems. Coalitions are rare. The two dominant parties necessarily compete at the center for votes, so that governments are more reliably moderate. The strong opposition necessary for proper scrutiny of government is assured, and governments remain sensitive to public sentiment because they can be, and are, regularly voted out of power. However, the U.S. experience shows that this is not necessarily so, and that a two-party system can result in a drift to extremes, hollowing out the center, or at least in one party drifting to an extreme. Nevertheless, on average, compared to countries using plurality systems, governments elected with PR accord more closely with the median voter, and the citizens are more content with democracy. Voter participation. Plurality systems usually result in single-party government because relatively few votes in the most finely balanced districts, the swing seats, can transfer sufficient seats to the opposition to swing the election. More partisan districts remain invulnerable to swings of political mood. In the UK, for example, about half the constituencies have always elected the same party since 1945. In the 2012 US House elections, 45 districts were uncontested by one of the two dominant parties. Voters who know the preferred candidate cannot win have little incentive to vote, and if they do, the vote has no effect. It is wasted. With PR, there are no swing seats. Most votes contribute to the election of a candidate, so parties need to campaign in all districts, not just those where the support is strongest or where they perceive most advantage. This fact in turn encourages parties to be more responsive to voters, producing a more balanced ticket by nominating more women and minority candidates. On average, about 8% more women are elected. Since most votes count, there are fewer wasted votes, so voters, aware that the vote can make a difference, are more likely to make the effort to vote, and less likely to vote tactically. Compared to countries with plurality voting systems, voter turnout improves and the population is more involved in the political process. Gerrymandering. To ensure approximately equal representation, plurality systems are dependent on the drawing of arbitrary boundaries of the single-member districts, a process vulnerable to political interference. To gerrymandering. To compound the problem, boundaries have to be periodically redrawn to accommodate population changes. Even apolitically drawn boundaries can unintentionally produce the effect of gerrymandering, reflecting naturally occurring concentrations. PR systems with the multiple member districts are less prone to this research suggests 5-seat districts are immune to gerrymandering. The district boundaries are less critical and so can be aligned with historical boundaries such as cities, counties, states, or provinces. Population changes can be accommodated by simply adjusting the number of representatives elected. For example, Professor Mollison in his 2010 plan for SDV for the UK set an upper limit of 100,000 electors per MP so that a constituency of 500,000 electors would have 5 seats but one of 500,000 and won 6 seats. His district boundaries follow historical county and local authority boundaries, yet he achieves more uniform representation than does the Boundary Commission, the body responsible for balancing the UK's first-past-the-post constituency sizes. Mixed-member systems are susceptible to gerrymandering for the local seats that remain a part of such systems. Under MMM, there is no compensation for the effects that such gerrymandering might have. Under MMP, the use of compensatory list seats makes gerrymandering less of an issue. However, its effectiveness in this regard depends upon the features of the system, including the size of the regional districts, the relative share of list seats in the total, and opportunities for collusion that might exist. A striking example of how the compensatory mechanism can be undermined can be seen in the 2014 Hungarian parliamentary election, where the leading party, Fidesz, combined gerrymandering and decoy lists, which resulted in a two-thirds parliamentary majority from a 45% vote. This is an example of how MMP can result in semi-proportional representation. Link between constituent and representative. It is generally accepted that a particular advantage of plurality of majoritarian voting systems, such as first-past-the-post, is the geographic link between representatives and their constituents. PR is criticized because, as its multiple-member districts are larger, this link is weakened if not completely lost. Party list PR systems with large districts, especially those without delineated districts such as the Netherlands and Israel, are vulnerable to this criticism. With smaller districts, in particular with SDV, there are counter-arguments. About 90% of voters can consult a representative they voted for, someone whom they might think more sympathetic to the problem, one could say, with whom they have a closer link. Constituents have a choice of representatives so they can consult one with particular expertise in the topic at issue. With multiple member districts, prominent candidates are more able to be elected in the home constituencies, which they know and can represent authoritatively, so there is less need to parachute them into constituencies in which they are strangers and thus less than ideal representatives. Mixed-member PR systems incorporate single-member districts to preserve the link, although, because up to half the parliamentary seats are list rather than district seats, the districts are necessarily up to twice as large as with a single-member system. Wider benefits to society. Wider benefits from PR have been identified in societies using it as compared to those using FPTP, including higher scores on the UN Human Development Index, a measure of health, education, and personal security, higher economic growth, lower deficits or larger surpluses, less inequality, and better environmental protection. Attributes of PR systems. District magnitude. Academics agree that the most important influence on proportionality is an electoral district's magnitude, the number of representatives elected from the district. Proportionality improves as the magnitude increases. Scholars recommend voting districts of between 3 and 7 members. At one extreme, the Chilean binomial voting system, a nominally proportional open list system, uses 2-member districts resulting in the election of one candidate from each of the 2 dominant political blocs, and so cannot be considered proportional. At the other, where the district encompasses the entire country, and with a low minimum threshold, highly proportionate representation of political parties can result, and parties gain by broadening their appeal by nominating more minority and women candidates. After the introduction of SDV in Ireland in 1921, magnitude slowly diminished as more and more three-member constituencies were defined, benefiting the dominant Fianna Fáil, until 1979 when an independent boundary commission was established reversing the trend. In 2010, a parliamentary constitutional committee recommended a minimum magnitude of 4. Nonetheless, despite relatively low magnitudes, Ireland has generally experienced highly proportional results. In the Fair Vote Plan for SDV for the U.S. House of Representatives, 3 to 5 member superdistricts are proposed. In Professor Mollison's plan for SDV in the UK, 4 and 5 member districts are used, with 3 and 6 as necessarily to fit existing boundaries. Minimum threshold. The minimum threshold is the minimum vote required to win a seat. The lower the threshold, the higher the proportion of votes contributing to the election of representatives and the fewer the votes wasted. All electoral systems have thresholds, either formally defined or as a mathematical consequence of the parameters of the election. A formal threshold usually requires parties to win a certain percentage of the vote in order to be awarded seats from the party lists. In Germany and New Zealand, the threshold is 5% of the national vote, but both define an alternate threshold of constituency seats: 1, 3 in Germany, 1 in New Zealand. Turkey defines a threshold of 10%, the Netherlands 0.67%. Israel has raised its threshold from 1% to 1.5%, 2% and 3.25% in 2014. In SDV elections, winning the quota of first preference votes assures election. However, well-regarded candidates who attract good second preference support can hope to win election with only half the quota of first preference votes. Thus, in a 6-seat district, the effective threshold would be 7.14% of first preference votes. 2. The need to attract second preferences tends to promote consensus and disadvantage extremes. Party magnitude. Party magnitude is the number of candidates elected from one party in one district. As party magnitude increases, a more balanced ticket will be more successful, encouraging parties to nominate women and minority candidates for election. But under SDV, too many candidates can be counterproductive, splitting the vote and so losing seats. An example of this was identified in a ward in the 2007 Scottish local elections, where Labour, putting up 3 candidates, won only 1 seat, but where they would have won 2 had a candidate particularly favoured by Labour voters not stood. The same effect may have contributed to the collapse of Fianna Fáil in the 2011 Irish general election. Other aspects of PR can influence proportionality, such as the size of the elected body, the choice of open or closed lists, ballot design, and vote counting methods. Measuring proportionality. A number of ways of measuring proportionality have been proposed, including the Luce-Mohanby Index, the St. Liguey Index and the Gallagher Index. None of these fully support ranked voting. Deviation from proportionality denotes the proportion of malappointment in a democratic process. The deviation is a mathematical relationship between the percentage of votes obtained by a political party and the percentage of parliamentary seats allocated to it. It is calculated by subtracting each party's vote share from its seat share, adding up the absolute values, and dividing by 2.